Now, I'm not going to ask you to show by raising your hand, but I hope most of you have read the second chapter of the Gospel of John. It is rich. It is powerful. John writes this Gospel so that we may have life. By believing in Jesus, we may have life in His name. That's the whole premise of the Gospel of John. John has no reservations of who Jesus is. And he teaches us from the very beginning of the Gospel to the last lines in his Gospel that Jesus is God. But in the world today, there are many concepts of who Jesus is. There are two concepts that are polar opposites of each other, but many believe in one of these two. A lot of people think of Jesus Christ as the meek, passive Jesus. The Jesus that is all about love, all about forgiveness, all about good and happiness and joy. Those who have that concept of Jesus don't like to think about and don't talk about and really don't believe a whole lot about the repentance that Jesus tells us we must have. So a lot of people said, you Christians, Jesus didn't judge, so you shouldn't judge either. And a lot of Christians believe like that. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum are those who would make a good Pharisee. They believe in the judgment of Jesus, and they like to look down at other people and say, bunch of sinners. You sinners, I'm so glad I'm not like them. And Jesus, I know that you're going to bring justice to them. You're going to punish them for the way they're living their lives, and I can't wait to see it. Neither one of those two concepts of Jesus is the true biblical Jesus, the real Jesus. You see, if you have that concept of Jesus being all about love and you don't know that He is coming back for judgment, then we're gonna live our life. We're gonna miss out on a part of Jesus that is critical. And if you live your whole life thinking about judgment and you don't get to enjoy the love and grace of the Lord, then you're missing out on that. But Jesus was not that uppity person who walked around. I remember when I was a kid, my view of Jesus was a lot from what I saw in the movies. And you know, I pictured Jesus as being walking stiff in the white robe, talking holier than thou. There's a lot of people who says, hey, this is the church. You shouldn't be laughing. I actually have had people tell me, you shouldn't be laughing in church. Jesus is a joyful person. Jesus had a very charismatic personality. He was one that we wanted to be around. The people wanted to be where Jesus was because He loved them and He taught them. And when necessary, He rebuked them. He was the real deal because He was God in the flesh. He was the one who sat down on the steps and He said, bring the little children to me. For such is the kingdom of heaven. If we don't become like little children, Jesus said, we will not enter into the kingdom. He was the same one who stood up and He saw how the Pharisees were so judgmental. And He called that illustration to come to your mind, that word picture. He says, how in the world are you trying to get the speck out of your brother's eye and you've got a big log in your own? He was a man who loved people, but He loved them enough to teach them that they need to straighten up and they needed to walk in His ways. And John gives us in his gospel the beautiful pictures of Jesus. And we see two different illustrations of Jesus in this second chapter of his gospel. So if you would, turn to Gospel of John chapter 2, and let's read the first couple of verses together. And let's see this one attribute of Jesus. In that second chapter, starting with verse 1, we see on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now Jesus is seen here. He just called out his first disciples. They're following him. He goes a 3-day journey from where they were at to Cana of Galilee. And he's invited to come to this wedding. We don't know who the bride and groom are, but we know that Jesus was invited, and it's alluded to that his mother Mary must have had something to do with the wedding. She must have been part of the preparations, or at least knew the people very well. And so Jesus is here at a very festive occasion. That's not the staunch, holier-than-thou Jesus. Jesus is there where the party is, and he's having a good time. He's enjoying being around other people. He is there for a purpose, because they wanted him there. Now, most of those people did not know anything other than Jesus being Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph and Mary. But Mary knew who Jesus was. Mary knew who her son was because she remembered what it was like about 30 years earlier. She remembers being alone that day when the angel came to her and said, "Mary, oh, Mary, you are so blessed. God has chosen you to bring forth a son, and his name will be called Jesus, and he will be great." Mary remembered what it was like when she gave birth to Jesus that cold night in Bethlehem and wrapped him in rags, the only thing she had with her, and laid him in a feeding trough. She remembered what it was like when the wise men came and said, "We have seen his star and we followed it. He is the King of the Jews." And so here, she remembers who her son is. We don't know anything really about Jesus' life from the time he was around 2 years of age until the time he is 30, except for one little occasion when he's 12 years old. We read about him hanging around after his family had left. They didn't know he wasn't with them. And he stayed in the temple and he started talking with the rabbis, the teachers, and interacting with them. And they were amazed at his knowledge, to be such a young kid, still full of the knowledge of God. We see the worry on Mary and Joseph as they frantically search for him and finally find him. But we don't know what happened other than that little occasion. But Mary must have seen a lot of things over his life. And now the wine has run out. It's an embarrassment for the groom, and it's an embarrassment for the whole family. Because see, their weddings were a lot different than ours today. In our weddings today, we normally have the bride and her family really put a lot of effort into getting the place decorated and preparing a meal, and everything is over in one afternoon. In those days, in the days of Jesus, a wedding feast would last a week or even longer. And you'd have all these guests coming and you'd have to feed them. It was a festival. It was a banquet. It was just a great time where everybody enjoyed coming together. But now, the wine had run out. And she goes to Jesus and she tells him, "Jesus, the wine's run out." And we read his reaction, and sometimes we may read that and get the wrong concept. Woman? You know, I don't know what my mom would do to me. She asked me for something, and I said, woman? She'd probably tell me, probably about like your moms would tell you, hey, I brought you into the world, I can take you out. And we read that, and we say, man, that's a little gruff. But that's not, the English translation doesn't tell us really what it means. Basically, he says, ma'am. He lets her know, I respect you, but you need to know who I am. Ma'am, what does this have to do with me? Jesus, he was on God's timetable. God had perfectly and orderly, just like God does, laid out things that Jesus needed to do in order to be at Calvary at just the right time. Jesus said, we're not going to rush things. My hour has not yet come. But something happened in that dialogue. I don't really know. Maybe it was as he was talking to her, he gave her a little wink. Something happened because she looked at the servants and she says, whatever he says to do, you do it. And look what happens. Now there were set there 6 water pots. Pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews. They contained 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, draw some out now, and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now. A miracle. All of these pots that were designed for washing. You see, with the wedding, there was many guests coming in, and they had to wash their hands. They had to wash people's feet. It was to ceremonially cleanse the guests as they came, and they were sitting around empty. But now Jesus says, take them and fill them up with water. And the servants filled them up to the top. There was nothing else that could be added to them, up to the brim. Jesus couldn't slip in a little something that would stain the water and make it look like wine. No, nothing else could be added into the pots. And then he says, now, dip some out, take it to the master of the ceremony. Now, the master of the ceremony was a very important part of this extravaganza they were doing. He had to make sure that all the food was right and it tasted good. He had to make sure that the wine was good and wasn't soured or anything. So he takes a taste of it and he says, wow, now this is unexpected. Most of the time, the very best is given first. When people have not dulled their senses by drinking too much, they could taste it and they could say, wow, this is great. And then after they have drunk, then their senses are dulled a little bit. Then we bring out the cheap stuff. But Jesus, he gave them the best. Let me tell you something. That's what Jesus does. That's what he's good at. He gives us his very best. That's what he promises us, that we will have his very best. And here, in this occasion, which is a festive occasion, a lot of people can't imagine Jesus being at a party, but that's exactly where he's at. He gives of himself and brings the best to the party. Now, there have been many times over the years that people have asked, did Jesus really turn something into alcohol? Not Jesus. Surely no. But let me tell you, in my opinion, This was Palestinian wine. This was the real deal. Jesus turned that water that came out of the heart of the earth into Palestinian wine. Now, let me tell you something. Palestinian wine is not the wine that we have today. It's watered down a little bit. Matter of fact, it's watered down quite a bit compared to what we have today. We've taken the fruit of the vine and tried to profit by making the alcohol content so high that you can take a glass and you can have the effects of it. You see, Satan always tries to give a cheap imitation of what God does. Satan wants people to be polluted and be inebriated, not control of their faculties, but God doesn't want that. Solomon himself, the wisest man ever to live, tells us that wine will make a fool of you, like a mocker of men. Leaders shouldn't partake in that because you need to have all your faculties. You need to be able to think clearly and be in control, be composed if you're going to lead people. But see, Satan has made it so, it's so popular. But Jesus gave them real wine, but it was the best. It was not in the alcohol content, it was in the flavor. It was wonderful. And Jesus wants to work that way in our life. And He will give us His very best if we will allow Him. He took something ordinary and made it extraordinary. And if you are on the receiving end of those emails, I ask you a question. What in your life is ordinary that you would like a touch of Jesus' hand to make it extraordinary? What is just plain water in your life that you want to become something great? God has given every one of us a talent, an ability. What is it in your life that you're not using for the fullest potential? If you don't know what it is, ask the Lord and He'll reveal that to you. If you do know what it is, ask Him to use it, to enhance you, to make you a kind of person that's going to be a good worker for the kingdom. Let me tell you, if you're not working in the kingdom, then I doubt that Jesus is your Lord. I'm serious about that. It may be abrasive to you, it may be offensive, but if you're doing nothing that's kingdom work, and only you know that, if you're doing nothing that is kingdom work, if you're not sacrificing anything for the kingdom, then you're not following the Lord. You're not. And you need to know that. You need to hear that. It's not all about love and good times and happy feelings. There's consequences to our actions. To whom much is given, much will be required. To who does little, He says that little bit will be taken away and given to those who do much. That's Jesus' words, not mine. But John, he wants to tell us Jesus didn't mind going to a party. But he always left things better than it was when he found it. And now we read something else happens. Just a few days later, there's the Passover. And I'd like for you, if you would, to turn in that second chapter over to verse 13 and let's read. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And He found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers doing business. When He had made a whip of cords, He drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overturned the tables. And He said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." Then His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." So the Jews answered and said to Him, "What sign do you show to us, since you do these things?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But He was speaking of the temple of His body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the Scriptures and the word which Jesus had said. Have you thought of that picture of Jesus lately? The Jesus who is righteously indignant, who says, my Father's house will not be used to rip people off. It's not used to make people profitable. It is made to build people up. It is made to take the broken and make them whole again. My house will not become a house or a den of thieves. Now, what was wrong with what was going on there? You got a picture, on the Passover, tens of thousands of people would cram into Jerusalem. And they would come and sacrifice at Passover, demanded they would offer up something. If you were poor and could not afford much, maybe it was a pair of doves. If you were wealthy, maybe it was a lamb or even something greater than that. But a sacrifice would be given. Now what had happened was this business transaction of changing people's money over, because it was coming from all kinds of countries into Jerusalem, the business of selling them animals, they weren't going to be able to travel with all these animals. They'd have to buy them when they got to Jerusalem. All of that business that was being conducted in the temple could have been conducted outside of the temple. But just like what happens in the business world today, there were some who said, you know, there's a better spot. If we get inside the temple area, that's where a lot of people are going to come right here, and we're going to be able to sell them our animals, or we're going to be able to make more of a profit on our exchanging the currency. And so they weaseled their way in, probably by bribing the Pharisees or the priest or whoever it was to get in there. And then they were selling animals that were blemished. They were ripping people off a far greater exchange rate than they should have. And Jesus said, no more of that. It's over. He became angry. How many times do you think about Jesus being angry? We don't think about it very often, do we? We don't like to think about it. We don't want to think about our Lord being upset and mad at us. But we got to understand, that's a trait of Jesus too. He wanted the things of God to be lifted up and the things of man to be put away. What is it in your life that needs some cleansing? What is it that's in the temple? We don't have a temple anymore. This is not a temple. This is a structure made of brick and mortar and wood. Lord, help us. If something happened in this temple or this building was gone tomorrow, we wouldn't quit worshiping, would we? God wouldn't be taken away in a fire or taken away in a windstorm or a tornado. The temple is now in here. It's in us. It's the Spirit of God. It dwells in our souls. This temple is now inside of jars of clay. And if it's the temple, it needs to be cleansed. There can't be anything in here that is purely selfish. That needs to be dealt with. Now, it doesn't mean we're perfect. Because selfishness, lustful natures, things try to creep back in on us. That's a constant struggle. We got to keep cleansing. But it's not us who does the cleansing. It's simply us allowing the Lord to do the cleansing. So what is it in your temple that needs to be cleansed? Jesus is the only one that can do it. The Messiah was the only one who had the authority to go in and cleanse that temple out. And He did it. He can do it for you if you allow Him. But if you look at Him as being intrusive, uninvited, causing a disturbance, then you're not going to let Him cleanse it. You're going to go right back in and flip those tables over and start exchanging currency. You're going to go through the motions of sacrifice, but you're not going to give anything that costs you much. You can give as little as you can get away with. And that's not pleasing to the Lord. So today, we've got choices. Just like we see Jesus, He wants to come and be where we're at. He wants to be a part of our lives. He loves us and encourages us. He wants us to laugh and to have fun and to have joy in our hearts. But He also wants us to understand we've got to get our priorities in order. We've got to live right. This place isn't heaven. There's a place being prepared for us in heaven, but this isn't it yet. Live for the Lord. So today, will you let Jesus do some cleaning? Will you let Him perform some miracles? Will you let Him take the ordinary and change it into something extraordinary? I hope that you will. I hope that your desire is to be drawn closer to the Lord and to know Him greater. Just like what Dan talked about during our communion meditation. Your desire should be to know Him intimately. He wants to know you. But He won't force Himself onto you. But there's coming a day. And it's closer today than it was last week when we met. There's coming a day when every knee will bow. In heaven, and on earth, and under the earth. And every name will profess Jesus Christ as Lord to the glory of God. Don't wait until you're forced to bow the knee, because then it will be too late. Your opportunity will have passed. Your decisions will have already been made. And you did not choose Jesus as Lord until you were forced to. We're in the age of grace. It's the church age. It's a time when we get to choose to accept Jesus or reject Him. So today I ask you not to reject Him. You have absolutely nothing to gain by waiting. And if your temple is nasty, if your temple is filled with terrible things, Jesus can cleanse it in an instant if you'll let Him. You haven't dirtied it up so much that He won't come in and live. But He wants you to give Him that invitation.